Please enjoy this recording of Mark Hunter, DTM and 2009 World Champion of Public Speaking, in conversation with Bharat Sangakar.
So really good to be here. And look, it's a real honor to be having Mark here. And there's I heard Joe speak about certain challenges in the leadership roles. And then I heard Kevin mention something beautiful about, see, do, a kind of a formula. And Mark is one of those people, you meet people from different walks of life. I first spoke to Mark in 2016, and I've known him since then, interacted on various occasions. And he's one of those people who will inspire you in different areas of life, not just public speaking and winning contests. So it's a real honor to have Mark here. Thank you for joining us, Mark. Thank you for Janine for convincing Mark to join us, and then giving me this opportunity to introduce him. So the way we run this session is we get a good solid 1 hour with Mark. Think of it like a fireside chat. I got my podcast mic out to make it a bit more professional. I found myself a brick wall, as if I'm doing a stand-up comedy, given it's the International Comedy Festival in Melbourne right now. But this is going to be a nice conversation with Mark, really. And that's how Mark and I prepared for this chat. So you get a lot more value on different areas. A bit of a hygiene. I did ask for questions if you have any on Facebook post. I got an amazing response on it. I got a total of 2 questions. So you do have a chance to ask questions now. So, but as a matter of hygiene, put them in a direct message to me, not in the chat for everyone. So we don't distract Mark and everyone on the chat. We keep the focus on and the spotlight on Mark. So, and I'll pick up those questions to ask. So the way we run this is we'll give Mark a good 15 minutes to talk about his journey after I introduce him. And then we'll run half an hour on good questions and answers. I'll pick up some of the questions that you have. If you really want to ask him yourself, just let me know and I'll open up the mic to you. And then we'll give him the floor again to speak on leadership. So we have a very well-rounded agenda around Mark. He's also very comfortable in his study, from what I can see. And he's super excited as well. So let me first tell you a bit about the man if you haven't met him before. So are you excited? Yes. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mark has had and is still having a very colorful life. He's not shy of seeking out adventures at the tender age of Septuaginta Duo. And that is Latin for 72. And Mark is a firm believer that you should be able to say that you have forgotten Latin. Now, if you don't know Mark, this is the real bit for you to know. In 1974, this is 2 years before I was born, Mark had a water skiing accident which left him dependent on using a wheelchair. But did that stop that man? Of course not. Since then, he has notched up many outstanding achievements. And there are 4 specific ones I want to tell you about. As an educator, Mark fought for his right to return to teaching in primary schools. And he won, becoming the first primary school teacher in Australia to teach from a wheelchair. And then later, the first school principal to lead schools from a wheelchair. Mark went on to lead many schools in Queensland. The second point, he fought for the rights of people with a disability, successfully prosecuting the Queensland government for discrimination without legal support, and he had important roles as the chair of the Brisbane Disability Council and CEO of Hopewell Hospice. And then he started his achievements in Toastmasters. Mark now celebrates 30 years as a Toastmaster. He won the World Championship of Public Speaking in 2009. That's 15 years from today, before today. But did he stop there? Of course not. He received the Presidential Citation for Service to Toastmasters in 2012. And then in 2014, he was the Toastmaster of the Year for D69. But the real achievement for him was meeting me in 2016, of course.
Of course.
But it wasn't just me. Mark has traveled the world supporting Toastmasters and is soon off to speak in Saudi Arabia. He has also published a book on leadership titled The Voice of the Bonsai, a conversation on leadership. The man is passionate about life, his bonsai, Toastmasters, and wheeling on the edge. With that, Mark, let me welcome you to stage to give us a bit more about this journey that I gave people an insight of. Please welcome everybody, Mark Hunter.
Thank you very much, Bharat, and it's good to see some people that I've known in the past, either in more northern districts or even down in Victoria when I was down there. It's a pleasure to spend some time chewing the fat, as they say, about these issues around which we sometimes involve our lives, including leadership and Toastmasters. As Bharat said, I'll start with, and he's going to keep me on time, a bit about my journey. You don't really need to know much before Toastmasters, or BT as it could be called, although I stole my first kiss from a girl at the age of 6 on a bridge that went over a stream at the backyard of my house then, but we'll put that aside. And the accident was there. Let's go to why I joined Toastmasters, and I'm rather fond of sharing this because people join Toastmasters for many reasons. Some join for leadership and communication. I joined to find a wife. I was a teacher, school principal, and when you put teachers together, all they talk about is teaching and kids and whatnot. So I needed another avenue for conversation, and I thought, Toastmasters will work out. The ratio of men to women is in my favor, and so I joined, and that stepped me into Bribey Toastmasters. So that's why I joined. Why I stay is a totally different reason, and I think we all morph through a Toastmasters life and changing the reasons why we remain. I joined a club in which I found my first mentor, and this story is so important for understanding why Toastmasters sits above all other organizations when it comes to teaching communication and leadership. And that's because one of the basic teaching principles is it's based on consistent feedback and a consistent formative feedback. And Ivy Foster was my mentor, bless her soul. She's now running a few Toastmasters clubs up in heaven, I'm sure, having organized God and the trio and everyone else who's up there. She saw something in me that I had not seen. There I was. I'm joined my first Toastmasters club, and I went in there, and I wondered why all these people were idiots and did impromptu speaking off the cuff. I thought that was a crazy thing, while I was casually glancing around the room for prospective wives. But that soon was replaced by the ethos and the values base that Toastmasters holds true, and we should all hold true. And one of those is service, and through service mentoring. And Ivy did. She encouraged me to go. We had novice competitions back then in 2009. Whenever it was. 1974 I joined, yes. And she encouraged me into joining, going in the novice competition. And that was my first sense of this. I didn't even know about the competitions then. They weren't the reason I joined. And I remember vividly my first novice speech, which was about the otters in Camasphera in the Bay. And I still love that piece. But I soon realized that this organization was going to have a deep impact on who I was and what I was in the way of a communicator, a listener, and a speaker and a leader. All those things came to me because I got consistent, certain, and formative feedback from people who seemed to be at the club to support everybody else. I love that aspect of Toastmasters, and I still thrive in Toastmasters. I may mention that in a moment because of that. Why I stay now in this organization is the concept of service. and I have supported individuals, I've supported districts, I've supported clubs with regard to sharing. It gets back to that word that you used, Kevin, in that issue of being a teacher. And I think once a teacher, always a teacher. And if you're a good teacher, you can leave people with what they need to grow. And I could get carried away with just a recent experience. So service is the reason I stay. I also stay because I've set up a number of clubs. I've been area director a few times, but the last club I've set up is a specialty club where we have our own curriculum, and we've got about 30 pieces in this curriculum, 30 different genres, and we overlay pathways on that so that when people do one of these genres that are outside the normal curriculum, they can fulfill their pathways goals as well. Toastmasters has allowed me to travel, and I've made many friends both in Australia and overseas. I've traveled to countries I would not normally go, and as Bharat said, I'm off to Saudi in a couple of weeks to support Toastmasters there, and at the same time creating a new speech. So my life is better, and I am more effective for my involvement in Toastmasters, both as a communicator, a leader, a listener, and a guide or a teacher. One of the things I've come to realize is that I am an edge dweller. Even, when I met that young lady on the bridge at the back of my garden and stole a kiss, I was an edge dweller then, and I've challenged the status quo and bureaucracies and governments, and I find myself happy on that edge. But when I'm on that edge, I need my guides or my mentors. I call them guides, and that could cover coach, mentor, feedback person, Toastmasters in general, who are prepared to say, hey, Mark, why don't give me some feedback. That's what they do. So it's an amazing organization. I firmly believe it's still a top organization when it comes to taking people on a journey of self-awareness, communication, and leadership. Okay. Did I find a wife? Oh, perhaps I should leave that till the end. Okay, any questions? I can go. I think, and interrupt me, Bharat, when you want, if you so desire.
Okay.
I think I learned a lot from the accident, and part of this I'm sharing with the Saudi. They want me to do a very short keynote, and I'm talking about how it is that the fact that we all face adversity, and how we need to do it, and we need to do it from a position of self-awareness, or consciously being self-aware, the level of acceptance and then action. And that has set me in good stead in life and in Toastmasters. Okay.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful, Mark. And I think I'm glad you finished your journey story with touching upon the adversity side of things. Something which always amazed me about you, that your World Championship speech essentially was a story about the adversity, but it wasn't told in a way about how you faced adversity and how you overcame it. It was anything but that. It was a lot more about a life's perspective and how you deal with life, and how love is the theme of how you carry on with life. So I definitely want to touch upon many of those aspects as a part of the Q&As of how this came about. But straight off the bat, the authenticity which came out of your speech and how you present yourself today is exactly the same. And 30 years in Toastmasters, that's really what I think makes people more and more authentic. Would you agree? Would you agree that this is the place where you come to and become more authentic?
I think if we've got to accept feedback, and not all feedback. We've all got horror stories about when feedback didn't go well. But when feedback is delivered in the concept or construct of service or love, then it has the chance of enabling us to come and understand who we are authentically. I know that there are aspects of my speaking style that don't sit well with everybody, and that's fine. But God help anyone who tries to push me into a box into which I will not fit because it's not authentically me. And I have an organization around me that allows me to be authentic. And, I believe that the level of authenticity, if it's high in you, you'll have a greater chance of being an effective leader as well as an effective communicator.
That is beautiful. Let's talk about the contest, because that's what everyone also wants to know more about. Before we get in the contest Q&A, does anyone have a question about Mark or anything that you heard about? Okay, let's jump with the contest then. Thank you, Kevin, for that. Kevin rounded it off with the ability to be vulnerable enough to hear, share, and accept those gifts from others. Totally agree. Big fan of Brené Brown and listening to her on that topic. Contest, Mark, and carrying on from the theme of how you be authentically yourself, and you touched upon speaking style, which and that you don't want to put yourself in a box of certain speaking styles. Totally agree with that. One of the biggest things I speak about the contest journey and why I love contests was I get to try many different speaking styles. And I tell this to many people that it took me a good 4 or 5 different contests, winning contests, to understand what kind of a speaker am I. And from there on, it became more about me just being myself, because then I knew this is the style I want to do. And there's something that you mentioned on this topic that we'll touch upon, a question, specific question on that. But let's take this conversation as in a very journey format. Let's start right from the title and go from the beginning to the middle to the end, and let everyone go on that ride with you. And the first topic which comes to my mind every time I'm talking to you is you're the man who has some really interesting speech titles. Your World Championship speech title was very amusing to me. I didn't know what I would expect when I heard a sink full of green tomatoes. Was it going to be a speech about vegetables? Was it going to be a master chef speech? And then it just went in a very different life perspective. But then I also saw your website and I realized that all of your speeches, not just that one, you started with a 1996 speech. Mark, by the way, has got his speeches, his entire speech, written speech on his website. Should go and check it out. It's beautiful to witness someone's writing. I'm a strong believer that it's the writing which wins half of the contest, not the speaking. So you should definitely go and see what he's written in the speeches. So your first speech was Stuck in a Coconut. It's a very interesting visual I have not read the speech, but the title was interesting. Then you have a sink full of green tomatoes. Then you have something called a faintly written, just faintly written. That's all it is. Then there's limited edition. And then there's the voice of the bonsai. That's what you wrote the book about. When I asked you the question, you said these are seductive titles. Tell me more. Tell us more about the seductiveness about these titles. How do you come up with these titles? And what makes them so seductive?
Okay, thanks for that. My process for writing when I first started competing was I started with issues about which I was passionate. I could commit authentically, and I was living in a little single bed unit, and I put these concepts, 5 different concepts actually, in the center of 5 different sheets of A3 paper or A3 card, and blue tacked them to the wall. And over a 3-month period, all I did was download anything I read, saw, or heard onto the various sheets. It might have been a single phrase, and it might have gone on 3 of the 5 concepts. And what happened was, and back when I was competing, we needed 3 speeches for the competition. Now, of course, we only need 2. So 2 of these A3 sheets literally, or metaphorically, fell off the wall because they didn't, it didn't grab me. And so I ended up with 3 concepts about, and then I just thoroughly went into that process of brain dumping on those 3. And the titles they don't necessarily come first. They actually come closer to the end of my writing process. A Sink Full of Green Tomatoes was a story about a blend of my mother and my grandmother's wisdom built into one story. The Faintly Written is the concept of our watermark that we have. Stuck in a Coconut was a story about how we can get stuck in our past, and I used my story, plus I used 3 stories in that 7-minute speech, including a kid from school where something, adversity happens, and if we're not careful, we can get stuck in it and stuck in the coconut. And it's a story about how some islanders, some Asian cultures caught monkeys using a coconut. Face to Face, Eye to Eye, Heart to Heart was the one I got 3rd in the world with. And that came out of an experience I had in a dentist's waiting room, where across the room sat a mother and her child, and I was sitting the other side of the room, and the child and I made contact, and I started pulling faces, and she started pulling faces, and we were having a delightful time until the mother saw what was going on and slapped her child's leg to shut her up. And my message was, ultimately in that speech, is that when we communicate face to face, eye to eye, and heart to heart. So that was one a topic. It was a seductive topic, and it worked for me, as do all my speeches if I give them, and they need a seductive topic, a topic that quirks, it gains interest, or as you said, what's a Sink Full of Green Tomatoes, as Pat Johnson called them. Yeah. So I think there's a good thing in a title. The other issue in the beginning, when you begin to speak, is your credibility, and that's Aristotle's one of his pillars. And Mike, I don't want to sit here. I was going to say stand here, but that'd be another miracle. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, these are all the things I've done. It's far better that that's done for me. So the credibility for speaking and gaining or accepting the gift of 2,000 by 7 minutes, 14,000 minutes of life that's in front of you when you compete. It needs to, when the title is read, as you said, Bharat, it needs to perk up some sort of interest or question.
Yep. And I also think it's the good titles, like The Sink Full of Green Tomatoes, has a great recall value. You remember some titles and they instantly know this is what the speech was about, right?
Yes.
Or some of them serve as a good metaphor. But I love the fact that you mentioned that these titles kind of show themselves when you're doing a speech a few times, and then you realize what the title should be, because what the essence of the speech has to be captured in the title in some form. So there's no point starting with a title about a speech. You always start the speech, you tell a story, and then you let the title show up. One of my speeches was about On the Edge, but it was never on the edge for a whole contest year. I think until the division, it was heights and depths. And this is when I was practicing for the district contest. when someone told me, you know what, that's not the right title for this. You're not talking of height and depth in the speech. You're talking of being on the edge and jumping off the edge. You start the speeches of the edge, and then that became a beautiful sort of a addition to the speech, and everyone loved it when the opening was itself me standing on the top of the edge. So thank you for that. So coming to the writing bits, the I think your superpower. I must have repeated it. I'll be repeating myself a few times when I say that your writing is just beautiful. It's just beautiful writing. And that's where, how many times do you end up writing a contest speech before it becomes a winning speech?
Number one, it's hard to write a winning speech because the winning involves a competition and others you may not know. My World Championship speech was rewritten hundreds of times. I was still working full time as a principal, and I would get up and have breakfast, and the car would be ready, and I'd sit down for half an hour, and I might work on a sentence or a phrase even, or a paragraph. Bharat and I were talking about, poetry versus, or how do I approach it? And I approach my writing as if a speech is a piece of music, and every sound and every piece of silence has to add to the audience's experience when interacting with the message I'm giving them. So hundreds of times, Brett, I'd do that before I went to school, and after I came back from work, I would also sit down and hear and listen to. I never once did I record myself speaking. Can't stand it, like most of us. I didn't fall in for that, nor did I even look in the mirror when I was practicing, because I believe the focus becomes what you see rather than what you're trying to do. So I listen to the sound, and I'm passionate about the music that voices can share and give.
Hold on to that thought. I have a question for everyone. How many of you have tried your speeches as a musical piece or with a musical score in the background and see how your speaking sounds? Raise your hand if you've ever tried your speeches with a musical score and see how you sound. Okay. I have a little bit of a visual for you. Let's listen to something where Mark gets his inspiration from and how his writing became poetic. I had to go and dig into how does Mark write speeches which sound very poetic to me. And then I realized Mark actually likes poetry. And he just touched upon how he thinks speeches are like a piece of music. So I said, you know what? Let's just share with everyone. Let's show them what it sounds like, what it does to your voice and everything. Okay, here you go. Hopefully this just works like magic. Share sound, stereo, and we will play this from one part of the poetry where Mark starts speaking and then his tone changes.
Then, far away, the morning's cold approaches. A long incision of grey steel staining slowly to red. But all the valley still is covered with deep darkness, and no bird preludes upon his bough. Only the shapes of the vague mountain summits gradually make known their presence, not as things of earth, but part of the vague world of cloud. And then suddenly the Tarn, with swift gesture, has gathered all the feeble lights of dawn into a hushed embrace. Before the earth wakens or air puts on her coloured shift, water has flashed his welcome to the day. The Tarn that all night long waited, a crowd of little herded waves, whispering together their faith and expectation all night long.
That was magical. That was something. I just wanted to give everyone a flavor of if you had a musical score and you were speaking, how would you evoke? To me, that was an example of how you evoke, and just add the musical score to that speech, and that just exemplifies it. That just enhances it. Tell us a bit more about this, the tone of your voice. Tell us a bit more about how you evoke through the tone of your voice. What do you do to get that kind of a flavor to your speeches?
Tone is often written about as being the most important part of body language. And so I consciously use the tone of my voice when I need to make a point. Now, men have a wider vocal range, but women still have that capacity to use tone to convey emotion. Now, in that poem, which is a poem I fell in love with when I was about 18, and blended that with Richard Strauss's Alpine Symphony, which was a perfect match. And both the words and the music demanded that I use the tone that went along with the description of a dawn on a mountain lake, the Tarn. So consciously using tone when you are speaking, and even in keynotes, if you're delivering things that are a bit longer than the 5 to 7 genre, when you come to a point that's most important and it needs time and presence, then that's when tone can be used. It's a skill, it's a behavior, and as such, we can learn it until such time as we become consciously competent in its use. Yeah.
Amazing. So we spoke about the title. We spoke about titles showing up themselves. Then we spoke about how your writing was inspired by being very poetic or listening to poems. And then we spoke about the tone is where you're very deliberate about the tone you use in your speeches. So those three things in my mind is what makes Mark speeches Mark speeches. So you mentioned to me something about when you go in a contest journey with all of this, which makes Mark Mark. How much do you go and analyze other competitors, other speeches, previous champion? How much focus do you keep on that when you're competing?
I never watched a previous world championship videotape. And when I'm working with others or for others who are in this contest, I say, don't go there. Don't study. Don't try and study. And the books that have been written about this competition are many. I said, don't pick them up. Find out who you are. Use your club environment to give you the feedback that you need to grow and be able to create something that is of worth. So I never listened to a world championship previous speech. So I kept myself out of that, because if I got caught up in it, people become echolalic, and you can sit in the world championships and you can say, I know that person. I've seen them. I saw them back in 2000 or 19, whatever, because they start echoing someone else's style. My style is authentically mine. And that's what I encourage people to do, and they ask me, what to feed. I'm very careful about the feedback, and when I'm coaching people, what does your heart say to you? And if your heart was speaking, how would it do it? So authenticity, not studying others, and preparing very well, obviously.
That is amazing. And that popped up a really good question, which came on the chat from Janine, was about how do you then go about creating stage crafting your speeches? How do you know that the stage crafting is going to work when you haven't watched other speakers and what stage crafting works for them? Did you have some acting background? Even though you're on a wheelchair, do you know how to act, which makes stage crafting a lot easier?
Well, I've been told that I act up a lot, actually. And the last character I ever played in a show was Herod in JC Superstar. I was carried on by a bevy of beauties in a beach lounge, and I have an acting background.
Okay.
I think I did this when I was down in Victoria. I talked about Satir's modes, and I have stagecraft. Of course, being in a wheelchair is an added advantage, and I talk to people. Maximize who you are, and I'm a firm believer of that. And in the World Championship speech, you'll see me do this, and I'm the only one who can do Rodin's Thinker in the middle of a 5 to 7 minute speech and get away with it. So stagecraft, I work on these with ambulatory people, people who can walk. I help them use the stage, and I also talk about Satir's modes, which are 5 modes or 5 pieces of behavior that work on the audience at a subconscious level. So an example of stop me, I could say, I love you. But if I say it, I love you, totally different feeling. I love you, another feeling. Or I love you. Those are 3 of her modes. And if you're into the area of competition, worth having a look at them. Or I've got flyers I can send down to you, Janine, if you want. It was a journey I had to learn. The very first time I competed in '96 with another speech, Obsession with Perfection, I was a work in progress. I'm still a work in progress, but I'm very much an edge dweller. So much so that I got some more publicity shots done recently, and they are underwater, in my wheelchair, in a suit and tie and shoes, and you'll see some of them shortly.
Amazing.
And I only hold my breath for 12 seconds. There you go. So
that is amazing.
Be yourself. Sorry.
No, I totally. I mean, I've always debated this topic in my head, and I'm sure a lot of people who've been Toastmasters in long enough, whether they've competed or not, you get this feedback about, hey, this is not how people speak in TED Talks, or this is not how you speak at work. And my answer to that is yes, but this is not TED Talk. You're not doing a TED Talk. When doing a TED Talk, change your style. You will have to stand in front of a mic in a circle and learn that art. And when you're doing stand-up comedy, you will have to hold a mic in your hand. It's a bit different, but if you're doing a speech which connects with your entertaining style and you got to put yourself out there, do that, right? You got to just be yourself and put yourself out there. Just don't make it a very mechanical way of expressing yourself. Just make sure that it's something which flows with your speech and there's a purpose, something we speak about in evaluations of the time. So we do want to go to the leadership elements, but there was something which I wanted to also quickly show people is, again, back to the topic of language and writing. And I quickly wanted to share a quick anecdote of mine and also show your video clip. There was something which when your speech started in the World Championship, and I'll start the thing in the background while I'm waiting for the thing to load, and I'll share the thing. When your speech started, the first thing that I caught attention was the language. It was just the beautiful use of language, the alliteration. Before I saw you using the wheelchair as a horse, and I was like, this guy is completely mastered the art of speaking and using his body language. But the language was the first thing that caught your attention, right? Funny enough, I had my first speech when I wrote and I won the contest with and went to semis. The speech started with the second line, which has, would you want your story to be a gripping, glorious, great tale? And when I wrote those gripping, glorious, great tale words, I was so proud of myself that because I had just learned the art of alliteration. And there was a small win for me, but I realized this is what makes writing beautiful. This is what catches the ear, right? And make it beautiful to listen. And I had that, which I'll play for everyone in case they haven't heard your speech. And let's listen to that one particular first line. And you talk about how you wrote this. So this must be the right share sound. Hopefully everyone can see this.
Literature is literally littered with lively legends. Amongst them rides Don Quixote, the man of La Mancha, an idealistic knight who fought for the rights of others and dared to dream the impossible dream. Madam Constance.
That's it. That's it. And that just caught my eye. Just tell the audience, tell us, how do you come up with a line like that? Beautifully written, the alliteration, and set the scene.
Okay, 2 points. I used the process of a passion pit, and I've shared this wherever I go. It's a process where you gather people who think differently to you around, and the whole purpose is for you to talk about concepts. And one of the words that came out of that passion pit, if you notice, I mispronounced the first word of my speech. I added a syllable, and I'm in the middle of saying this, and I'm thinking, what? Hunter, you just added a syllable to literature. However, the rhetorical devices used well can again work at the subconscious level. You know, there'll be some people who will say, oh, that sounds interesting. There'll be others who will say, oh, he's using alliteration. It doesn't matter. I wanted that as a means. You know, they talk about how much time you've got to catch your people, catch your audience, and get them on side to at least give you the respect of giving you a go before they fall asleep, turn off, or fall off their seats or whatever. And the alliteration worked. The way I began face-to-face, eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart was I mimicked a Dr. Phil or type show. You know, ladies, welcome to the Mark Hunter Show. I've got with me Sean, who's going to blah, blah, blah. And I overacted this show, this talk show, before I moved back to the audience and started the story that was on at the dentist. So, yeah, I love it. I love, see, language and music. They are good bedfellows.
They are indeed. Amazing. And I really would encourage everyone to go and read the speeches once again. I love reading the speeches. There's a lot of wordsmithing. It's 1,000 versions before that speech is produced. Something to learn from. To Kevin's point earlier, Big Kev, actually, not Kevin. I forgot we used to call him Big Kev. So we heard Mark, we saw how he does things, and then, you know, we learned from all of this is really what the session was about. We do want to move on to leadership. Does anyone have a burning question of contest before I asked one question, which will have a segue to leadership? Any other question that anyone has in contests? The floor is yours. There you go, Daryl.
Yeah, thank you very much for all that wonderful insights to you. And when I saw your name, I did review your world speech to have a look to say who's Mark. So then I found out who Mark was, and then to meet you here in person. What I was wanting to know is, with your world speech, when did you know that you know that you know that was it, when it was ready?
You know, I changed one thing the night before. It was a piece of body language. It was the one where I whip across the stage and do the sudden turn. It's a good question, Daryl. When I first started competing, all I wanted to do was beat the North Americans. Because the rest of the world had one contestant in the finals. One Gentile was there, and against 8 North Americans from Canada and the US. And I had this passion to beat the North Americans. Took me 3 goes before I realized, Hunter, you're on the wrong track here. This is the wrong head frame. And then the head frame changed from winning to sharing a concept that I believed was of value. And when I did that, it didn't matter as long when I got to the stage of knowing, oh yes, I think I am serving the message well. That might be when I get to the stage where I think it's ready. And, you know, the last thing I said before I went on in 2009, the World Championships, was I just want to change one person's life, just one. one and I'd be happy. And I had got third in the world back in 2007, and I was sitting with my sister. This is the first contest she'd come over to see. And I said to her, you know, third, I've done that, don't really want that. And when third was announced and it wasn't me, I was fine. Didn't care if I came 9th, 10th, whatever. I had no sense personally. I didn't have a sense of how I went because I didn't see all the other speeches, and I was fine. I had people come up to me in New Orleans some years later who said, didn't even know, sing full of green tomatoes.
Mhm.
You did that for me. So in answer to your question directly, Daryl, when do I know a speech is ready? When I know it's the best piece that serves the message.
Yeah.
And that is a great question, Daryl. And that is something which I had heard from Mark. I'd heard from Dhananjaya that he won the year when he stopped competing. And I didn't know what that meant until 2019 when I went to the finals, when the conscious choice speech was the only speech I remember until then. I was 4 years in Toastmasters by then. The only speech which I could not practice at all anywhere from club to any other clubs because I just didn't have the time. I started a new job in a corporate, very, very busy, second child. But that speech was a speech which was purely centered around a message, which I really want to share with the people about organ donation and everything else. And that just turns out goes all the way to finals, right? And I could never understand how. I never put the effort, never used any props. I never stagecrafted, and I'm winning. And since then, I think my formula became more about, okay, let's come up with a speech which you totally believe in, go. Another story, didn't work in the last 2 years, worked until 2022. But then the truth of the matter is I also did not put in the kind of work in the last 2 years, which a speech requires. It always requires many, many iterations before it becomes a fine piece of music, like Mark said. So thank you for that question. That was really good. Now, going on to leadership, Mark, there's a very nice question which came in speaking, which is a segue to leadership. The question from Daryl Clark about Daryl truly admires your ability to tell a story in terms of leadership. In terms of leadership, how can we utilize stories in our professional life and in Toastmasters volunteer-based leadership requirements? And what are the benefits of utilizing stories in leadership roles?
I think a firm believer of stories around leadership. And if I think of one in particular, I was at a school, I think we had about 500 kids. We had a special education unit where we had kids with profound disabilities. And they were over there and the rest of the kids were over there. And I came there as principal and I observed for quite some time. And that came up prior to this session, how sitting back and observing until you get a sense of what's happening on. And I observed a condition or a behavior in the school that I turned into a story and I told the staff and it was about a story about a kiddie I followed around the school or parts of the school who didn't know where they were. It was a kiddie with special needs, disabilities. God help anyone who gets between me and the rights of a kid with a disability, because I quite contentedly leave wheel tracks metaphorically on their back. And I said, this kiddie was wandering around the school and no one owned him. Help me understand this. And if you've heard me speak before, I love that question. I said to the staff, help me understand this. Because it's not a negative. It's not saying, it's not blame. And so I started with this story. That's ended up in a total school reconstruction with the ultimate principle that every child was the responsibility of every teacher. So no longer did we have the special needs kids over there and regular kids over there. And that became, it hit the papers. It got, it meant that everybody needed to know every child in that school and treat them as equal in their eyes as a teacher. So that's a story. This book that I wrote, The Voice of the Bonsai. I love bonsais. They're part of my life. I have 30 of them. And it's a story about the bonsai master, and I'm not a master. I love my trees. I love them dearly, but it'll take me another 300 years to become a master of bonsais. And I don't have that much hair to lose, so I can't do that. But it's a thing on leadership based on the story of conversations between the tree and the master, and what it means. And I'm not sure how much time I've got, but in one section, the values in the workplace, this is about. And the bonsai says, "Master, you are my leader, and when you lead from the heart. You are consistent and certain. And when you lead from the heart, I can take comfort in your very essence, what you stand for and what you value." And the master asks, "So what values do I bring to the art of creating you? How can I rise to the responsibility you bestow upon me?" And in answer to these questions, the bonsai says, "As my leader, my master, you have many tasks. The first is to know me. For only when you know me will you know what to do for me and what to do with me. And when you know me with such a level of intimacy, you will respect me." So the book is just full of these conversations, which are of themselves stories. I mean, I've got a history of leadership and volunteer, including Toastmasters and paid environments. And one of my last positions was CEO of Hopewell Hospice on the Gold Coast. And I loved it. People came there to die, and I had the privilege of sitting beside them and talking about them and understanding them and their family as they came to die. One of the best gifts I've ever been given in my whole life was to work there. How much time have I got? I've got another short story. I got time for a short story. I don't
You got 5 more minutes, Mark. I think we've already introduced the leadership section anyway, so please go for it.
So when a resident came into the hospice, I'd get to know them and understand who they were. And this is a story about Cess. Cess's rule it is. And Cess came in to die, and I was sitting there with him saying, "Cess, so tell me about your life." And he said, "I was married for 43 years and I loved my wife." And he went on to explain this love. And I said, "Cess, I've completed 2 good marriages, one which started in Toastmasters. What's the secret of your love, your marriage?" And he said to me, "Mark, whenever I woke up and was talking with my wife, I consciously, actively sought to understand where she was coming from in those conversations. Not what she was saying, not the emotions behind it, but consciously sought to understand." And I share this story, and there's more stuff around, but stories are part of leadership. So when I speak to people and leaders, the art of this puts, active listening, back on the arc. Cess's rule takes listening to a level beyond which has been written. And I asked Cess before he died, not that day, but I asked him, "Can I share your message?" And I'll call it Cess's rule. And Cess's legacy lives on whenever I get a chance to speak, and has done tonight. So stories and the stories of in the hospice were very much values driven, and we created our values while I was there, and the stories around values and what those values look like, because we don't do it in Toastmasters. Well, I don't know. Have I run the PETS program down in Victoria? We have this PETS program we created on leadership in District 69. It's a whole day's workshop. But when we get to values, we can list them, but how often do we take the time to understand how the value of respect links to other people, materials, the venue, feedback? We need to consciously interact with values, and I did that in all my positions. I used to say when I went to a new school, these are my values. I ask you to hold me accountable to them. And if I miss and I step outside, I give you permission to tell me. That's how passionate I am about values. So storytelling and leadership, good bedfellows.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. I can't think of a better way to end this, but I do want you to share something about what you mentioned to me in a very simple word, but also use the time to speak more about leadership if there's a better answer. I asked you a question of what do you identify yourself as, Mark, at this age? And you give me one word. Please share with the audience, what do you identify yourself as, and give us a bit more about that.
I am of the belief that there is no better title that you could wear other than teacher. No matter who you are, where you are, to be a consummate teacher is one of the titles I wear more proudly than world champion or presidential citation or anything else. That is who I am, and that is who I will remain. And whether I'm sitting on the edge in a pool or sitting in my wheelchair, suited and struggling not to drown, then I will always remain a teacher. And that, hopefully, I mean, I'm not so naive and I'm not precocious. You don't shove stuff down people's throats when you're teaching. You lead them to their own awareness by Cess's rule, listening and suggesting and feedback. Teacher.
Thank you. Beautiful. I love the essence of that. You don't identify yourself anything to do with the titles that you've earned. It's the humility of it all. And I firmly believe that teachers were the first leaders that we all had. They are the ones who shared those stories. They are the ones who gave us those lessons. And those examples, those stories is really what made us who we were. So there's nothing more noble than being a teacher. And that's really where the leadership starts from. Thank you so much, Mark. This was a beautiful, beautiful session. I'm sure everyone will agree. The time has just flown. The 1 hour just passed. We didn't even realize, and we all want to listen to you more. And I hope that there's another session where we can get you around to share a lot more insights on not only about your speeches, but also the voice of the bonsai. I do encourage everyone to go and visit Mark's website. Also look at his book. I would definitely go and look at the book just because the title is so intriguing. And I am just intrigued by your titles. With that, thank you so much, Mark. Once again, very happy to have you here. And I hand it back to Janine. Please give Mark a big round of applause.
You're most welcome. Thank you all.